Right. Hello. Jonathan Swift here, Royal Cartographical Society. We're talking, of course, today of giant sea creatures, and one thing that we've been asked to impress upon all of you is that a net like this won't work against kraken or giant tentacly nasty things. If the creature has the capacity to take on a brigantine ship, such as is the one demonstrated behind me in this instant lithograph that was drawn by a sailor as they were floating away from this attack, definitely this kind of net won't work. You want something a little bigger so that as you throw it, you don't sort of run out of net before you run out of creature, as they say. Hello and welcome to this episode of How to Be a Great GM. My name is Guy and today we're looking at making bigger monsters. We want them big and powerful. What's all that about? What's that about? Well, depending on what kind of system you are using, the monster scales can sometimes be a little underwhelming. I personally like in my games, when we're dealing with fantasy, or with science fiction for that matter, to have creatures that are 300, 400, 500, 600 feet in length and are truly, truly colossal. There's a challenge, however, when you have something that is that big and that towers into the sky above the player characters, or that is so long that getting from the tentacles to the eyeballs is almost impossible. How do you handle the creature's statistics and values? Now, there are some systems out there that do take this into account, but a lot of systems don't. So what I'm proposing to you today is my own way in which I make monsters truly colossal, and that allows for the PCs to have some kind of meaningful engagement with them that's not just we're trying to burn through the creature's 5,000 health points or get through armor that's so thick there's no hope that a normal weapon would even puncture it. These are my thoughts. Leave yours down below if you have better ones. We would love to share knowledge and build a better game for us all. Of course, hit that like button and the subscribe button if you want this channel to continue to produce videos. Let us know that you like what we're doing. And remember to hit that Goblin Bell so that you are reminded of whenever we launch new videos, which is now pretty regularly, almost every day. There's so much to talk about with this wonderful hobby. I absolutely love it. And of course, stick around right to the end for a bonus tip when dealing with bigger monsters. Let's jump right into it. Let's look at the purpose. Why would you want to have truly colossal creatures that dwarf dragons that make even the biggest Tarrasque look like it's basically just practicing? Well, generally speaking, it's because of awe and terror, which kind of go hand in hand. You can be in awe of something. It can be awful. It's so big, it's so terrifying, it's awful. Or it could be terrible or terrific. So terrifying that it instills in us absolute panic, fear. It's just amazing. It blows our mind. So, like, this hair is absolutely awful. It is terrible. Something so big and hairy and it just doesn't stick. You can see I'm not used to long hair. Right, so generally speaking, you're going to use these creatures for awe, you're going to use them for terror, or you're going to use them as a set piece. Now, when you're using them for awe, that is something really just used to describe something spectacular in your game world. When I was designing the world of Car for the Karos Stones that I ran on the Save or Dice channel, there were these gigantic beasts, these rock beasts, which roamed around the inner sphere of the world, the undersphere it was called, and they would consume mountains. They were these large geovores that ate geography. Their excreta was processed gemstones, minerals, things of value in and amongst this churned up rock-like paste. So there was a huge value to following around these things, these arcanosaurs, I think they were eventually called. Nonetheless, they were incredibly well armored and they were very, very well positioned to being almost invulnerable. They were there to inspire awe. In the latest Ghosts of Saltmarsh game that I'm running for Dungeons & Dragons on their Twitch channel, we had an encounter in a swamp where a turtle the size of a mountain, carrying a mountain on his back, walked over the river in which the PCs were sailing. It didn't do anything. It rocked their boat because of the massive amounts of water that it displaced, but it made the world feel as if there are some truly significant things out there. Now, Ghost of Saltmarsh was the inspiration behind these giant sea creatures as well, because the centerpiece of my entire campaign, the mini-campaign, is this giant Krakelich, this undead kraken, which is at least 350 feet in length. That's a truly, truly magnificently large creature. It inspires terror when one swipe of its tentacle deals an excess of 100 damage. It is truly a PC killer if it strikes at them. So how do we bring a balance? How do we make sure that it's a set piece and not just a death knell for our party? We need to bear in mind that if we are positioning these creatures on the world to be hunted, we need to make sure that they can be hunted without a TPK. No one likes to go up against a monster which they have zero chance of actually surviving. So we do that by then looking at our statistics. Now, I don't talk specific statistics here. It is up to you to apply them based on your game and whatever it is that you... whatever it is that you do in terms of your game mechanics. However, I look for targetable areas. So if we look at a giant squid, for example, I would say its targetable areas are its tentacles, of which it only has 2, and then its actual appendages, the actual arms, it's called. I didn't know this. The 2 tentacles, 8 arms is generally what they have. The tentacles are the ones that end in those giant paddles, which actually slap down and do the most damage. The arms are just normal, what I would call normal tentacles. They're actually just called arms. So what would we have? We'd have the 8 arms, each having a certain amount of hit points or health points. They would have a certain type of armor class. They're arguably easier to hit than perhaps, say, the eyeballs of the creature, which are a little bit more defended. I would have the tentacles having a different value, a different amount of damage. They would be dealing more damage than a regular arm because they're designed for grappling and for striking. Perhaps the back of the head, that entire area that you can't see down below the screen, would have different hit points. It would have a different armor class, a targetable value that the characters have to achieve in order to hit it. All of those kinds of things, I would break it up into multiple areas. The reason being, in comparison to this diagram, a PC might only be as big as my thumb, let's say, running around trying to attack this thing. So it is almost impossible to imagine that something the size of my thumb is going to be able to actually kill something where the eyeball is the same size. So what do we do? Well, it has huge amounts of damage. That's a given. It can sink ships. That's really, really powerful. On the other hand, how often do you actually manage to swat a mosquito or catch a flea or, for that matter, catch a chicken? Not easy to catch them if you don't know what you're doing. So that means high damage, but a low hit chance. So whatever the system you're using, usually there's some kind of attack and there's some kind of damage. Make the attack for the creature incredibly low. Why? It is so big that swinging one of its arms is like us swinging one of our hands. We think we're really quick for our scale. But on the scale of a mosquito or a hummingbird or even just a little chicken, we're kind of slow. So that would translate into a low hit probability. That's something that's important to bear in mind, is that the creature might only hit once, but when it hits, it has to hit hard. If it doesn't, then the PCs aren't going to be as in awe of it as they were before, and that's what we want. Now, they should also have special conditions. Now, this is not the ability to heal up massive amounts of wounds. I hate regeneration as a base mechanic anyway. All it's doing is prolonging the combat, which I think there's better ways of expressing it than it just gets back life force, so you have to continue hitting it down. But that's an aside completely. Give it some special conditions. Something like this, one little sucker is going to have a huge amount of strength, except that a sucker is the same size as a person, maybe a little bit smaller. Once that tentacle's wrapped around it, will the tentacle actually be able to contract enough to actually do damage? If you close your fist, you can squeeze pretty tightly, but a flea inside of that wouldn't even notice the pressure. So it's something to bear in mind there. Then think about the mucus that this thing is producing. If you have a creature, maybe it's not an octopi, maybe it is a giant jelly monster, it's dribbling vast quantities of liquids. So maybe the actual creature itself doesn't do much damage, but the PCs run the real risk of drowning in saliva. That's an entire possibility. When you start looking up statistics for a blue whale here on Earth, there are certain body parts that you go, that's really terrifying. And of course, I'm talking about the size of a blowhole on a blue whale. You could be ejected out of that and it wouldn't even notice you. So there are, of course, things that you can bring into account that maybe make the damage and the actual amount of chance of being hit seem weak in comparison to the special conditions. It makes a creature seem terrifying. Then finally, we need to look at the actual narrative of the entire beast. Now, when it comes to this, ecology, of course, is an important factor. What do giant squid, what do kraken feast upon? What do those giant geovores feast upon? In my world, they feasted upon mountains. That kind of made sense. It spoke as to why there was erosion. Oh, there's a geovore eating a mountain. How long does it take to eat a mountain? Centuries. One giant bite every 5 years causes a rockfall, causes a severe amount of damage, but opens up new farming land once the creature has moved on. So the ecology is important, and the ramifications of having that creature present also have major ramifications for your story. Think about what would happen if there were giant turtles running around. Villages would be built on top of them, and there's no reason why the turtle would try and shuck them off. They have no need unless it starts to weigh the creature down, but we're talking significant amounts of weight. So you'd have villages springing up on these things. Where we have these terrific giant squid, something is going to hunt them. There is always that possibility of an evolutionary development happening. You should take that into account when looking at the creatures that you design. And then finally, legends. Legends talk specifically to the NPCs of your world justifying the being. It's one thing to say you see a giant creature wandering across the landscape and your players go, oh, that's cool. It's another thing for the farmer to be idly leaning on their hoe as the PCs walk past and go, oh, you better watch out, old Nellie's on the move again. She took out Ben Hill over there. Nice little depression it's made now. We're all hoping for a lake to form there. Could be very useful for the village. But Nellie, she's heading north. You probably want to avoid that. By making the NPCs part of the story, by giving them the sense that it's just part of everyday life, it helps entrench that that's just part of your world. Now, I know that that seems to be counterintuitive to creating awe. The awe is in your players. It's not in your player characters. So when you have an NPC who then starts talking about, oh, well, if you want to catch the market, Nellie's just on the move. But mind when you're climbing the ladders that you don't climb near the back. Sometimes she gets gas and no one wants to be there when that erupts, if you know what I mean. No, go around by the front, much safer. Just not when she's taking a bite, of course. Sometimes can be a problem. By including NPCs, it really does make it feel as if it's just part of your world, which makes it almost more awe-inspiring, that you've got this entire society worked around these giant creatures. It makes it feel as if your game has been planned out to the minutiae, and it makes it feel more real. And that's ultimately what we're after. By creating legends, of course, as well, as the PCs arrive, they can hear a story of some old man saying, or old woman saying, well, I saw it. I saw the mountain move. Pay no attention to Ethel. She's, bit mad. She says the mountains move. They do move. I saw them. I rode one in the moonlight. I saw it because the glint of the yellow light shone upon its eye and caused it to move slightly to the left. However, build in legends, it makes your players want to go and find these types of creatures because there's no point in creating them if your players are never going to engage with them. Anyway, those are my thoughts on how to create Titanic monsters, things that are truly colossal. Give them hit points, give them armors for different body parts, and when those body parts are then removed, have them have disadvantage on certain actions. So if their legs are removed, they can't run as fast. If bits of their sensory organs are removed, give them a penalty to trying to hit things. Work with what would happen if that body part was lost, and try and incorporate that into the combat. Until next time, however, I wish you and yours the happiest of monster hunting. Now, for those of you that have stuck around all the way to the end, I do have some bonus thoughts when it comes to monsters. I would always look at the inhabitants of giant monsters, and we're not just talking in the case of a village on top of a turtle or something along those lines. Within our own wonderful world of nature, we have multitudes of creatures that have a symbiotic relationship with larger ones. We ourselves have got bacteria in our gut that we need in order to digest our food. They need us in order to be able to survive in a gut. So there are all kinds of other inhabitants that are likely to inhabit these giant monsters. Don't just think of the monster in isolation. Perhaps our giant squid has actually got multitudes of little lampreys that hide inside the folds of its skin. Or perhaps there are some kind of filter feeders that sit in between the suckers and that will actually help grip things for the suckers to then actually latch onto. All those sorts of things can be added just to create a bigger sense of drama. Because the creature isn't likely to be hitting the characters anytime soon, or at least it shouldn't be, you can add in these inhabitants that are going to actually act as the real combat rather than the actual Titanic beast itself. I would also look at treasure and organs. What are the ramifications of having the creature die? Well, food is a major one. When a beast dies, there is so much meat off of something this size, something has to happen with that. If it dies and the PCs don't care about it, well, perhaps that's going to attract scavengers, gnolls and the like in a fantasy environment, or perhaps those who are less scrupulous in the science fiction environment arrive to hack the beast up. I would make sure that the organs certainly have value. The eye of a giant squid, although it's the size of a shield or a cart, if that could be taken to the local wizard college, they can use it to create a mirror of seeing the future, or something along those lines. So I would make sure that if the characters defeat a creature like this, that there is severe, severe value. Is there treasure inside of the creature's belly? Maybe it consumed a castle that had a treasury, and the treasury is still there. Perhaps on its body somewhere there is still a carcass of a knight who had good armor. All those kinds of things can be added in. And then finally, the most important thing I would say is give the PCs a title. If the PCs bring down a truly titanic creature in a massive combat, all of the inhabitants of the nearby areas are going to give them a huge amount of prestige. Oh, there goes Titan Killer. Look at that. Oh, on the house drinks for you lot. You rid us of that horrid creature. Give them a title. It is a major battle. As we said, you're going to be using this as a set piece. It should be a set piece. And that means the PC should walk away with treasure, but they should also walk away with a title that immortalizes their actions and is giving them something to talk about post the game. It can always only work in your favor. Until next time, though, I wish you and yours the happiest of gaming.